Are we live, Ella? We're rolling. Hello,
Hello,
I'm Mark Egan. I'm the Greffier of the States.
I'm Lisa Hart. I'm the Deputy Greffier of the States.
So that doesn't mean a lot
No.
to most people, to be fair.
Basically, we support the States Assembly behind the scenes, give advice and guidance to States members and help them be States members, and then sit in the States Assembly when they meet and help make sure that everything rolls in the right direction, and we prepare all the paperwork and everything behind the scenes for that meeting.
So in relation to elections, it's a bit of an odd one really. We're responsible for election law, changes to election law, advising over the election observers. And over the years, I think we've become responsible for helping to inform the public about elections, developing the vote.ge website, and all of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, encouraging people to vote, to register, to stand, and to get involved.
So this follows up a video which we've released, which was a sort of introduction to Jersey politics and the basics of what people need to know to stand for the States next year. And that's on YouTube somewhere, probably one of the most popular YouTube videos I'm watching.
I would imagine we've had lots of watches by now, haven't we?
Going to get some merchandise out. And this is a Q&A session for members of the public to follow up on that video and to fire at us any questions that you have about standing for the States or about the States that we can possibly answer. And if we can't answer, we'll just ignore them. So, keep it clean. Should we start off? We have some questions already.
We've had some in already. Do you want to do the first one first?
So, the first one, you are both encouraging greater diversity in the State Assembly. What practical measures are in place to help achieve this? And do you think Jersey should introduce quotas? Bit of controversy. So that it's a bit of an odd one because we're not responsible ultimately for who stands for the States. We don't have. We're developing a party system. But if you look at other places, it's the political parties that decide, what qualifications people need to stand for election, and it's the political parties which have encouraged greater diversity and set in place things like all-women shortlists and stuff like this.
It's worked in some places. In the Welsh Assembly, they certainly saw an increase in the number of women they had coming forward when Labour instigated a quota system. And there's pros and cons, isn't there, really? Ultimately, what we want is an assembly which reflects the population of the island, and whether you can put a percentage as to how many men and women or whoever should be in there, it's very difficult to say. We want the best people up there, really, don't we, ultimately?
Yeah, for practical measures, things like this, we're trying to make it easier for people to understand what the States is and how to be elected. We have got more stuff coming online, training for potential candidates and things like how to deal with social media. There are things we can do to help people. We've always done stuff like seminars on how the States works, but we're trying to make that more accessible. We had recently a sort of it's almost like a recruitment fair in the town hall where we got people to come and meet different diversity groups and different political parties, in fact, and that was really interesting actually, and got quite a lot of people interested. So that's the kind of practical thing we're doing. I mean, quotas ultimately is something that would have to be agreed by the States, unless one of the political parties suddenly said, right, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to make it. We're only going to stand certain types of candidates in certain places. Rules in general would have to come through the States, and there's always going to be an argument that anything like that gets in the way of democracy, being people's ability to choose whoever they want. So there's always that argument going on. I think we would have to stand aside from that kind of argument and leave it to the politicians. But the practical things we can do are really about information, and they're really about helping people to understand what the States is like, what it's like to be a member of the States, and also provide practical support in being a candidate, because that's something that's a real gap in the system up until now. Vote.ge, we filled it to some extent with that website. But I think trying to really help people understand what the rules are, what the legal framework, and help people to navigate what is quite a complex
And encourage
set
people
rules.
to feel brave enough to take the leap, because it is a very brave thing to stand for election. You're putting yourself out there, and to recognise that anyone out there who's got political leanings, who's interested, could be a states member. There's nothing stopping anyone from coming forward, and anything we can do to help support someone out there who is at this moment thinking, oh, I've always fancied that, but I've never been brave enough to go for it. You know, hopefully we can give you some support and help you see that it is a reality, that you can realise you can be a states member if that's really what you want to be, and represent the people of Jersey.
I think it's worth just thinking a little bit about what we mean by diversity as well. So at the moment we tend to think of it mostly in terms of a gender balance. So we've got 14 women out of 49, which comparative to other jurisdictions in the British region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, who are our sort of neighbours primarily, it's not terrible, but
we're not terribly. No, we're all right. We can hold our head up, I think, amongst our colleagues. But what we would obviously like to see is it edging towards a better reflection of the population of Jersey, which is probably about half, isn't it? And if not a wee bit more women in there than men.
I think the other thing is, this is no offence to many very great states members, but I think it's something like 31 of our current 49 are over the age of 60, and that's that is obviously an issue in terms of just the demographic of the assembly, and it means that there are considerable underrepresentation of people of working age, frankly, or under the age of 60 anyway, and that it's not an easy problem to solve, because it's probably something to do as well with salary level, and it's probably the fact that we may just introduce a pension scheme has probably deterred people from standing for election. But there are all sorts of different facets of diversity. Disability, I know is going to come up because we've got a question about it, but that's another issue where we don't look like the general population as much as we should. So there are lots of different aspects really. There's not one. That's why quotas is quite tricky, because you pick one thing and say, right, we need more women, but actually if you've got lots of women who are over 60, you've not necessarily dealt with that problem of the age demographic.
No, it's what I said at the beginning. What we want really is the best people sitting in the chamber, and we want them to be a broad reflection of the population of the island in whatever mix that is. And putting in a quota, you're right, it's hard to pick what we do go for first. And you automatically assume that means women, but actually it's everyone. It's making sure it is reflective of our society. And at the moment it is pretty heavy in one direction, isn't it?
So going back to the practical measures, I think we are going to be announcing them shortly. We have got some stuff going up. Vote.g is the place to look, the website. That's going to include a lot more stuff in due course. You can sign up if you're interested in being a candidate. You can register. You can register to be on like a mailing list of information about being a candidate. So if you are thinking about it, it doesn't commit you in any way. We're not checking to find out whether you do stand or not. But if you're interested, you can just sign up on there, and we'll be sending out regular stuff over the next few months to help people prepare to be a candidate. And
find out what support is on offer from us to help you through this, whether it's just advice or guidance, or it is actually some practical support, like helping with the circulation of the information that you want to put forward to tell people your great ideas for the island's future. All of that is covered on vote.je.
When we did the event at the town hall, actually it wasn't just about standing for election, because standing for the states is quite a big step. We're also looking to encourage people to go into public life more generally. So the parishes is an obvious example, but there are lots of other kind of civic type positions that people can volunteer for, which might be a stepping stone into the states ultimately, but which might in itself be perfectly good enough. So there are things you can, you could register, you could take a look at it, and you might think, do you know what, it's not quite for me at the moment, but I'll have a look at some of these positions elsewhere in the parish or whatever, and make that commitment, because I think it's important. Civic participation
duty,
generally, civic duty, I mean, it's fundamental to democracy, essentially.
Yeah, and even down to just voting, that's the ultimate that you can do as in order to perform your civic duties, to get involved with elections, register and vote, so that your voice is heard. We've got some new questions.
Well, we've got old ones and new ones. What do you want? Go on, Lisa.
Should we do one of the ones that have come in? So, how long do you need to be resident in the island to stand? In general, you need to have lived in Jersey for the last 2 years continuously. But if you're somebody who's lived here in the past and you've returned to the island, as long as you're here for 6 months before the election, then you can stand, providing you've got in total 5 years or more residency. If you've got any specific questions about that, if it is a little bit confusing, then you can always check with us and we will confirm whether or not we think that you are eligible to stand. But in general, if you've lived here for the last 2 years and you're a British citizen,
I was going to say, yeah,
then you can stand.
This is something which has come up for debate quite a few times, so I'm not going to offer a view one way or the other on this, but whether you like it or not, you have to be a British citizen to stand for election, and that's something which the state says, repeatedly debated.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think we're good in some ways, because in some places you can live for years and years and years and not get a vote. If you go to live in France, for instance, I think you would struggle to cast a vote unless you become a French citizen. But, you know, we say after 2 years you've invested enough in the island that you can have a voice.
If you're a British citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? You have to, I mean, I think it's harder to become a French citizen than it would be to become a British citizen, perhaps. But it is a barrier, undoubtedly, to some people. It's a matter of some controversy, but that is the law. That's what it says. And if you don't agree with it, well, you need to persuade people to stand for election to vote against that provision in the next assembly. Shall we do the disabilities one?
Yeah.
Have changes been made to the State's Chamber in recent years to make sure it's accessible to people with disabilities? Well, I think I would say the first thing is the phrase "people with disabilities" covers a huge group of people of all sorts of different issues. So I think this question, it's almost as if it's written about wheelchair access. That's how it feels. Can come on to that in a moment, but of course that's only one aspect of disability. We have, obviously you've got all sorts of disabilities to do with impaired vision, impaired hearing. We had a candidate at the last election who had communication difficulties, and we certainly talked to him about the adjustments that could be made, not so much in the building actually, but into the way the state works. I think how I feel, Lisa, is that if anyone's elected, we will do our absolute utmost to ensure that they can participate fully in the States.
Absolutely. And I think if we've learnt nothing over these last 18 months about adapting to suit the needs of the Assembly, if you'd asked us at the beginning of 2020 about holding States meetings virtually, and everybody being on a laptop from their kitchen or wherever, and we would have laughed and said, well, you can't possibly run the Assembly that way. And we've shown that we have adapted to ensure that the Assembly can meet. So I don't think that it would really be as huge a hurdle as perhaps we might have anticipated the last election when people were standing who we may have had to accommodate in a different way. I think the world's moved on enormously, hasn't it? And it shouldn't be an impediment if you want to stand. And there are things that you feel that could be holding you back, we can talk about it and see what we can do. The difficulty we have is that the States Chamber is a listed building, so the actual fundamental building itself is a problem, but there are workarounds, and we run very successful Year 5 visits to the States Chamber, and on occasions do have some of the children there who've got limited mobility, whether they're in a wheelchair or whatever. And we managed to accommodate them within the room itself. We would have to find a workaround, really, wouldn't we?
Yeah, we would. I mean, the fact is that the building was designed in a different era. It was a Victorian era when disability was not treated as, well, basically you weren't going to participate in public life.
No.
That was that. So on the face of it, if you, for example, need to use a wheelchair, you can't get into those spaces for States members. We would absolutely try to find workarounds.
Yeah.
But the building itself, where we are at the moment, it wasn't actually designed to be, a parliamentary building. And I think if we had our chance, we'd start again and create something that was in line with modern standards. But you have to be realistic. But Lisa made a really good point actually about about the Teams meetings. I mean, we are COVID notwithstanding. I think these are here to stay. I think the idea that alongside every physical meeting there will be a ability for members who are not present but are in the islands and who can't make it in for whatever reason, particularly to do with health or whatever. I think we will be maintaining that indefinitely. I don't see that going away, because it opens up the assembly to people who otherwise can't attend for very good reasons.
It increases the flexibility, doesn't it, enormously, and like you say, it does open up the door to people who perhaps would formerly not have been able to remain a states member because of their circumstances, including childcare, including having small children, including being a carer, all of those things where your time is obviously limited.
But I think it is something we're looking at. There is a Commonwealth Parliamentary Association initiative at the moment to look at parliaments and disabilities, and where we're just doing an audit to see where we can improve, because it includes things like accessibility to the websites, things like subtitling our webcasts. There's a lot to it. There's an awful lot of different facets. I think it's important that we benchmark ourselves against other jurisdictions and then see where we can improve. But there's a lot of resource into that. But it is really important. I mean, we have to really commit to that. And I think change in London, in the House of Commons, change really only happened when a woman who was used a wheelchair was elected in 1997, and she simply demanded access on the same basis as everybody else. And of course, the bills are there, much like here, it's listed, and you couldn't do this, and you couldn't do that. But once she got in, things changed. And so I think it is really important to have people in the States who have disabilities, who can then say, actually, I need this, actually, I need that, because, we're there to support that. But that's what forces change to happen, really. Go on, then, should we crack on? What have we got?
About money, we've got sort of how much would it cost to stand and how much can I spend on promotional literature? Well, they're kind of one and the same, I guess, because there is a limit on how much you can spend as a candidate in order to ensure that there's a level playing field, and it's not just about people who've got big pockets full of money that can afford the sort of flashy campaigns. So there is a limit as to how much people can spend, and we don't provide any of that funding. So you would need to fund your own campaign if you were standing. The amounts for next time round are going to be £2,050 as a maximum, but for every person that's on the electoral register just before election day, you get an extra 13 pence. I'm no good at maths, and I can't say off the top of my head how many people we'll have in each district, but I think you could look at it being round about a maximum of about £3,000 per district, depending on how populated they were. That said, you don't have to spend all that, obviously, because it's your own money, and there are lots of things that we're going to be providing to help so that there isn't a burden on your purse. Vote.je will upload your manifesto document and your photo and all the gubbins to do with you standing for election for free on our site, and we will also produce a little video for you where you can speak for 2 minutes about some of the key issues that you want to promote. We will also include your manifesto in a mail shot around all of the households in your district, so that everybody in your district will receive a copy of your manifesto effectively. And we'll also film the hustings meetings if you choose to hold one of those within your district. So there's lots of things that we can do to help promote you as a candidate without you having to dip your hand in your pocket. But there is a limit, as I say, to how much you can spend, and it's about, I'd say, £2,500 to £3,000.
I think it's a really good point by Lisa there, because I sometimes see on social media people complaining that there isn't state funding of political activity, and wouldn't it be better if all of the candidates in their elections were allocated an amount of money, and again, that's a political debate. That's a system that could happen. It's just one we don't have. But actually, we do spend a lot of money on candidates and on the election, and we provide a level playing field, as Lisa's described, in terms of things like the manifesto booklets and the resource we put into vote.ge. That's available to everybody equally. It means that everybody's manifesto, everybody's mugshot, effectively goes out across every household, and it's online for everyone to see. And there's going to be at least one hustings per district, filmed and available for everybody to see. So that is quite a hefty investment on our part. And as Lisa's describing, on top of that, you can spend some of your own money on leaflets and posters and whatever you want. And we actually haven't sort of studied people's returns of their election expenditure in too much detail. But when I did look at it, I didn't. Some candidates don't spend very much at all. There's not a clear link between the amount of money that gets spent and the success or otherwise of the candidate. Some campaigns are obviously very efficient in terms of their use of money, so it shouldn't put people off, because your manifesto and so on is all going to get out there in front of the public, and probably one of the main investments that you as a candidate can make is time rather than money. It's the time you put in to meeting people, to going around, to engaging in local issues, to being where people are, to talk to them about what matters to them. It's the time actually is your biggest commitment. And obviously for some candidates that will mean giving up work for periods of time, perhaps on paid leave or whatever else. That's obviously a big money commitment as well. But it's not, there is an investment there undoubtedly. I wouldn't want to minimise this, but the limits are quite effective at making sure, as Lisa said, that it's not possible for candidates to sort of pour cash in order to saturate districts with their photographs or whatever
planes
else.
Flying through the sky, whatever.
Yeah, well, as long as they're really cheap planes.
Yeah. Often the very sort of simple thing of talking to people is the key element, and that costs nothing, obviously, apart from your time, like you say. So I think you're absolutely right. It's how much time people are willing to invest that really is the biggest cost, if you like. And anecdotally, people like the fact that someone's knocked on their door, that somebody's reached out, that somebody wants to talk to them and has shown some interest in garnering, getting their vote. And you will hear people saying, well, I'm voting for this one because they came round or they left a note through my door. And I think that's very important to voters, to feel that it's the time when candidates are reaching out and wanting to hear from them.
Yeah. So I think there has to be a trade-off, doesn't it? Because if you don't put that effort in, then chances are
all the slick campaigning in the world and balloons and whatnot isn't really necessarily going to translate into votes.
But I don't think. Clearly, some money is required. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And if you look at most candidates, they're getting a certain number of posters created or big banners or whatever, and they're spending money sometimes on their own glossy leaflets. It's relatively low cost for what it is.
Yeah.
Right, so one of my favourite questions: will a job description be available for the upcoming elections? And will all candidates be DPS checked? Well, job description, let's tackle that one first. Actually, this other question relates to it a bit, so I might read that out as well. Ministers are presumably busy with policy, but what actual work does a backbencher have to do? I think that gives a clue, actually, to the difficulty of coming up with a job description. So if you could pick a connotab. I'm thinking of one or two who have put in propositions recently. Council of St Martin, for example, with their one about palm oil. So if you take a connotab, they obviously have duties in the parish, which I think people in Jersey are reasonably familiar with. They have attendance in the States. They attend scrutiny panels. They're members of scrutiny panels, often very active in that area. They're working on their own propositions. So I've mentioned the Constable St Martin. She's just put through a proposition. Everyone's going to complain now that I've given her.
You have to do the other 11 now as well.
I mean,
they all work very hard.
Other members are available, but she's just put something that's on my mind, which is about regulating the use of palm oil in the island. So members are doing a multiplicity of things like that, some of which is visible to the public, some of which isn't. A lot of them will say, of course, as well, that they spend a lot of time, some of them do spend a huge amount of time with constituents, dealing with individual problems that people have got, often very complex problems, in the way in which they're interacting with different sort of states' services. is it possible to draw up a job description? Well, we have tried, and if you're a keen researcher of the state's website, you will find a proposition from a while back which tries to set out a job description. But it's really difficult to do because members are office holders. They're not employees. They're not. When they're elected, they don't get given a kind of, this is the contract. This is what you have to do. They find their own way, and the balance of work, I think that's the key thing. The questioner who talks about ministers versus backbenchers, obviously some members who become ministers have a much clearer set of duties than the backbenchers, but if you look at the backbenchers, some do a lot of scrutiny, some don't, some spend a lot of time.
Loads of constituency work, some don't. So it's incredibly difficult to define everybody's role because ultimately it's a very personal thing. And some members come into the States specifically because they want to do constituency work, and so spend an awful lot of time dealing with the people in their district, and maybe then don't necessarily join on scrutiny as much as others, or maybe they don't ask lots of questions in the States or put forward their own proposition because they're dealing with stuff behind the scenes. It's very difficult to say who's doing what and who's, you can't say who's working harder because everybody is doing a whole range of activities that the public simply quite often don't see.
I mean, I can think of members who are very, very active. They ask a lot of questions, they speak a lot, they put in a lot of propositions, and then I go on social media and they're being attacked for doing that. Essentially. And you think, oh, okay. And then there'll be other members who they don't do any of those things and they do other stuff behind the scenes that we might be aware of, and they're attacked on social media because they're not asking lots of questions and putting propositions. And I think it is a tricky one. It may be an issue that comes back in the next states. I think I personally think a job description around some of these roles would be helpful because it would enable us to say these are the duties, if you like, or these are the sorts of things that members do, and we could explain that sort of balance thing. I think that it just hasn't been something which has been it needs to be endorsed by the states really to have any traction to be an official job description. That's what we haven't
certainly when we have new states members and a little while in after they've done their induction, which we can talk about at some point I'm sure in the next hour, and we've helped them kind of hit the ground running. When the dust settles and they've started their work, usually in the first couple of months, when you ask them are they enjoying it or is it as they expected, the majority are enjoying it, but it's not what they thought it was going to be like. And it was very difficult for us to kind of open that door and show them the world that they're entering beforehand, because it is different for everyone, isn't it? And it's how much they decide to do, or where they position themselves and what they actually go for, whether they are going to concentrate on being a really ardent backbencher and scrutiny and all the rest of it, or whether they're going to be an assistant minister or do constituency work. It's a personal choice, and you have to find something that is right for you. And we've had members who perhaps thought they wanted to be an assistant minister and then found that they were missing the work that they'd done before, and really ultimately were not being for themselves. They didn't feel they were doing the job as well as they had been in the past because they missed the constituency work. So you've got to do what you feel is right for you in how you feel being a states member should be.
I mean, the actual work, the backbencher, a lot of it is committee work. It's a lot of it's scrutiny panel work, and a lot of, if you look in detail, a lot of propositions that have gone through the states, quite a few have been amended by scrutiny or have gone back to the minister and then come back because of scrutiny work. It's an important role. It sometimes becomes quite politicised, but when you look in detail at what's going on, there are lots of examples of ministers thanking scrutiny for the work that they've done in order to improve what's initially been put forward. And there's just to give one example, we've got members at the moment. We've got a member at the moment who's at the climate change conference in Glasgow with the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, speaking there. Jersey's done quite a lot there, and this has been an initiative where backbenchers and ministers have worked together to put forward and develop resources for small countries, small states and small islands in particular, for what policy options they have for dealing with climate change, to the extent that, you know, Jersey's at the global table. So there's things like that go on. Now, those don't get an enormous amount of publicity, but there's quite a few initiatives like that. We do a lot of work with other jurisdictions on aspects of how they run their parliamentary affairs, post-election seminars and things like that. We're very active in all sorts of areas, and it's our members of both sides who get involved in that kind of work. We've got later this week we've got our colleagues from Guernsey and the Isle of Man here. Isle of Man have just had elections, so many of them are new members, and they're here really to share experience and to learn lessons from each other. And we've got a busy day on Thursday of debates and networking around issues of population policy and healthcare models. So both pretty important for all three islands in different ways. So there's a lot of activity like that. And I think it doesn't. Yeah, it's not everything gets not everything should get blanket coverage in the media, but that's the kind of thing that goes on. And members can pick and choose, as we've been saying, really, which things they get involved in. DPS checks, this comes up quite a bit. So candidates have to declare, don't they? They sign on the form that they haven't got.
They have to declare any convictions, and there's a list of the convictions that fall under the category of things that would disqualify them from standing for election. But yes, generally they need to declare any previous convictions, and other than that, then no, we do not DPS check our state's members.
No, we don't, because there are, well, I was going to say there are complicated and lengthy reasons. We've got plenty of time to tell you what they are, of course. And the DBS system is run using UK legislation, which strictly controls the categories of people who can be DBS, and it's not entirely clear that you could lawfully DBS check candidates. Certainly, that's the position at the moment anyway. Candidates are not employees, so who would do the DBSing, if you like? And how would that work within the time frame for elections? Because DBS checks take a while to come through. Are all sort of factors that get in the way. I suppose there's nothing to stop individual candidates producing their own self-check, although of course all that would show would be recent convictions, which would be declarable anyway. So that's a possibility, but it's I think you need to be careful as well sometimes not to make it a competition as to who can provide the cleanest CV and publish. It is a balance really between what information the public kind of wants and the freedom of democratic choice. I mean, I've not, you've got a lot longer memory here than I would have, but I'm not aware of candidates coming forward who said we've got nothing to declare, and then something comes up.
No.
You kind of wonder, well, what would a DPS check add in that context?
Yeah, because it only covers unspent convictions, doesn't it? So no, ultimately, it's the question about the honesty and integrity of people coming forward as candidates, and you would hope that the people who do so are of good character and are going to not break the law whilst they are a state's member. But there are rules in place should that happen.
I think in a small place like Jersey, I think you kind of rely on the fact that during an intense period of scrutiny during an election campaign, if somebody does come forward and they haven't been transparent about their past and they haven't declared things they should have declared, it's going to come out.
Yeah.
But it's a thing. I mean, I'm not dismissing DBS checks. It's been debated a fair bit, and I understand where it's coming from. It is just a far more complex proposition than at first sight it appears to be when it gets talked about. Right, on to happier territory. Polling cards. Will there be polling cards produced for all electors? Or do I have to do it at my own expense?
Some candidates do produce polling cards which they issue to people in their district with their electoral numbers on and such like. But to be honest, the system here in Jersey, when you arrive to vote, there's usually somebody there that will find your electoral number. Nobody needs to see you don't need to have your electoral number at hand in order to vote. So it's entirely a matter for candidates if they feel that's a thing to do. I think it's quite common in the UK, isn't it, that you have your electoral number or polling
Well,
number.
they're produced by the local authority
Yeah.
in the UK, so everyone gets one. We do a letter now, don't we? A letter goes out a few weeks.
Yeah, a letter will go out in the beginning of March from all of the parishes, listing all the people in your particular household who are on the electoral register, and that's the opportunity, if there is somebody missed off, for them to quickly make sure that they get on the register. Basically, they've got until June the 15th to register so that they can still vote in the election. But if they manage to get on a little bit earlier, then they'll be able to access things like pre-poll and postal voting, which will give that bit of more flexibility in choosing how you want to vote. But there's a little bit of time. You're not, the deadline isn't sort of tomorrow for you to register. But you get that letter in March so that you can confirm and make sure that everybody who lives in your house who is eligible to vote is on there, so that they don't rock up on election day and face the indignation that my son did to find that he wasn't on the list. That's inclement.
There we go. I mean, it's probably a good point to talk about polling stations, actually, because the main use of these cards in the UK is to tell people where their polling station is. Now, in a UK constituency, there's dozens and dozens of polling stations, and people don't, or even if you've lived in the area for a while, you don't necessarily know what's been chosen for that particular time. Here it's a bit different because it always tends to be the parish hall, or in some districts it's particular well-known locations.
But next year is the big change. So we are going to be sending stuff round to everyone in the island, because it's a big change for everybody, most notably in St Helier, where we've rejigged the districts a little bit. So those of you who live in St Helier may find that even though you've always voted in a certain place and you've always been part of this particular district, that could well have changed for 2022. For the rest of the island, you'll find that it is pretty much business as usual, I think, because you will probably still be voting where you've always voted, which is your parish hall, even if now you are part of a larger district which incorporates some other parishes. You'll still go and vote. For instance, if you live in the districts of St John, St Lawrence and Trinity, if you live in Trinity, you will vote at Trinity Parish Hall, but for people who are going to represent all of those three parishes. But we're going to send out a whole heap of stuff so everybody is absolutely certain of where they vote and where they actually are within the districts themselves.
So actually, if you're thinking of being a candidate, it is really important to know where the polling places are and to be able to advise people, because we do have that problem. I remember last time in St Saviour, people turning up at the wrong place. They were supposed to be at Georgetown, they turned up at Wolfont.
And it's frustrating if you found that you've come out and you're in the wrong place, and that, I think people will then be reluctant to kind of go the other place because they've already parked the car, got out and come back in again. So hopefully we'll get it right for next time, so that everyone knows before they head out where they need to go and that they're heading in the right direction.
So we've got a good one. For people with caring and childcare responsibilities, what kind of provision is there for state members? So it's a really interesting question, which we have talked about a fair bit. I think there are strengths and weaknesses to being a state member in terms of caring and childcare responsibilities. So, and we obviously have experienced this because there are members. Certainly there are members now with childcare and care and responsibilities. I think if you look at states meetings, they're predictable dates by and large. They're predictable hours by and large. We did have a rash of late sit-ins maybe it's a year or two ago, and they seem to have calmed down. So by and large, things finish at 5:30. And the dates are set out well in advance, so there's a predictability there which helps with planning workloads. As we talked about before, there is that flexibility really in terms of what the role is, which allows people to sometimes take on more and sometimes reduce their commitments depending on what's going on in their personal lives. We have got experience, as I mentioned, of members who are absent because of so as you may have seen at the start of the States, there's a roll call, and members who are absent for various reasons, the reason for absence is registered, and there is now a parental responsibility absence for anybody who isn't present because of a parental responsibility, and that's important because it can't then be challenged. There's for some of these reasons they can be challenged, they can be a bit fractious. This is just it's a given, and there is we are moving more towards a predictable parental leave arrangement for members who are new parents. It is complicated because members aren't employees, so it's not the same as an employee relationship, and members can manage their own time and their own attendance themselves. But clearly, people in the States want to know, what's reasonable, what isn't, and that's what we've been moving towards. So I think it has its attractions, and certainly talking to members with caring and childcare responsibilities. And when we say caring, of course, that could easily be elderly parents.
Absolutely,
and all sorts of
we've had that situation too, definitely.
Yeah. There are some strengths in the system. It's and I think the predictability is probably the one of the best aspects. I mean, it is it's a high intensity job at times. There is a lot of stuff to read, a lot of stuff to think about. There are a lot of high intensity conversations going on. It can be difficult to balance that. Just like with any job, it can be difficult to balance the demands that have been placed on you with your own domestic responsibilities. But I think the States comes out reasonably well.
I think we've moved a long way, and I don't think it should stop someone standing if they do have caring responsibilities, whether that be for young children or an elderly relative. That it's doable. I think now the flexibility is much more evident than it ever was.
And the team stuff as well.
Oh, that helps enormously. So you can be there, keeping an eye on things at home while still being very much proactive and participating in the States meeting.
Well, there's nothing worse than getting the call from the school or the nursery to say, someone's gone down with it or whatever, and you've got to come and collect them, and then that's your working day wiped out, and probably the next day. Whereas now, as a States member, you can continue. It's obviously not ideal if you've got to stick the child around. I know that feeling, but you still have that opportunity, and there's those possibilities. I think I'd encourage anybody who's thinking of Stanton and has care and childcare responsibilities of any sort to come and talk to us.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be States members that would be willing to talk to them as well and give the States member perspective rather than just our perspective. But I think Lisa's right. I think things have improved, and it's come and talk to us about the particular challenges before you make that judgment. But it's certainly not. It's far from impossible. Yeah. It's definitely doable. But it's not. It's like any.
It's like with any job. Yes. You have to juggle, and you have to find a way of balancing your priorities. But it is definitely much more achievable than it ever was in the past.
So, it's made me laugh. When can you start campaigning? Well, some people never stop.
You can smell the electioneering in the air.
Well, I see you showed me a member's campaign leaflet just the other day.
Yeah. I mean, you're quite right. I think throughout your entire time as a states member, because it is obviously a job with an end date where you have to reapply effectively for your job every 4 years. So during those 4 years, you want to show that you are doing your job effectively and that you deserve to get your contract renewed for another 4 years. So if you are on the ball as a States member, you will promote the work that you've done as you're doing it and ensure that the public are well aware that you are doing everything that you promised that you would when you knocked on their door and asked for their vote 4 years earlier. So that if you're talking about the official start of campaigning, then that really, I guess, is closer to the election than we are now. The thing to keep an eye on is the expenses, because you may well start sort of producing leaflets or putting up some posters and that sort of thing. Up until, I think it's the 22nd of February, any money that you spend is fine. You don't have to keep a note of it. But from the 22nd of February next year, which is the 4 months preceding the election, you then need to keep a note of every penny you spend, because that is then counted towards that sum that we mentioned earlier on, that sort of 2,500, 3,000 that you're allowed to spend. So you mustn't make sure that you haven't kind of spent the whole lot in March on a whole range of nice glossy posters and pamphlets, and then find yourself that you literally don't have any more money that you're allowed to spend on your campaign. So yes, keep tabs on that. But yes, campaigning can start whenever, and a lot of people, when they're thinking of standing for election, position themselves maybe a little bit beforehand to start doing more community related roles, get more involved in groups and so on, to get themselves out there, to get their profile in the public gaze, so that they, people are aware of who they are, because then they can build their public persona based on the fact that they've done some charity work, or they've been involved in a particular pressure group, or they campaigned for something. And that's one way of getting the public's eye on you, really.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's about, at this stage, it's more about raising your profile, isn't it? So I think if somebody went out now and put up loads of glossy posters, some eyebrows would be raised, and it's a marathon, not a sprint, as they say, and I think it's a long time still to the election. So it's worth thinking through the stages of a campaign, I suppose. So now might be the time to start getting your name out there, and people start to know who you are.
Start petitions, writing letters to the paper,
like
that sort of thing.
But the actual campaigning in terms of knocking on doors, maybe leave that a little bit later. I mean, some campaigners in the UK and elsewhere, no doubt, would be they campaign all the time, and I'm not sure we see so much of that here.
No.
And that's a different form of campaigning. But at least it's absolutely right. The key moment is when the money starts to count, because that can really cause trouble for people. But I don't know if well, yes, I mean, there's nothing to stop somebody producing lots of leaflets now and putting them out there, but they need to know how to position them, I think, because there isn't, to say now vote for me when the election's
miles away
or middle of the road. So it's about thinking that through, I think. Shall we do, so we've got, I have additional needs that will make things like door knocking and standing for a long time during hustings difficult. Can you give me any advice? It's a bit like the disabilities question, but in the election context.
We want to talk about hustings, because it mentions hustings.
Yeah.
The hustings have traditionally been a meeting in a room, usually a parish hall, chaired by somebody, where people within the room can ask questions of the candidates, who kind of sit in a line on the stage and also by rote. If it's an election for a deputy or a constable, then there's usually a smaller number of candidates, so a fair few questions can get asked. But when it was the senatorials, we had like up to 20 odd people sat answering the same question in a roundelay. So they had limited impact, I think, on the public present, being able to really get an idea of what each individual candidate was really thinking about a range of issues. So we're hoping that the hustings for next time round can be a little bit more invigorated. And there's nothing wrong with those traditional events, and they can go ahead. We encourage them, because any chance to engage with the public is a positive one. But also to consider those people who perhaps can't make it to one of those events, or would rather participate like we're doing here online. So we're going to be looking at being a little bit more inventive as to some of the ways that the public can access the candidates and ask them questions. So if you are thinking of standing, it may well be that we will run an online hustings for your district, where the public will do what you've been doing tonight, which is posting questions for you to answer, and hopefully it will be a little bit more punchy, a little bit more interactive, a little bit more pacey than perhaps the regular traditional format.
I think if you're a candidate with additional needs, it's about we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? It's about just rethinking the traditional activity. So if you're able to walk around every house in the parish or in the district and putting a leaflet through and so on, it's brilliant. It's quite a big ask for some of the If you look at the far
the bigger
northwest,
districts,
St.
yeah.
St. Peter, St. Mary, good luck.
You'll be
anyone.
fit.
Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of hills and a lot of lanes, and a lot of drives to go. And I think realistically, for a lot of people, including some existing states members, then they're not going to be able to do that kind of thing. But we would really, I think, candidates should aim, I think, as far as possible, to recruit a team to help them, and to use that team to work with them. So, for example, if you find door knocking difficult, could you perhaps drive around parts of the districts, have people knock and say, here's the leaflet, and candidate so and so is just here at the moment. Do you want to come out and speak to them? Or indeed, rather than go around and knock on every door, position yourself in places where the people
like
go.
A surgery or something, or outside the co-op or what have you,
or whatever else, and say, well, actually, I'm here for a couple of hours. Get permission, obviously, with the shop if we do this, but I think it's the kind of thing that would work perfectly well.
I think it would. You
stay still, let people come to you, and there is just trying to think through different ways of approaching. I mean, Lisa's quite right about hustings. The physicality of that's going to be difficult. Well, the online thing, we're just sat here, it's quite comfortable really, it's not doing us much harm. I think it is just thinking through different ways. It's a bit like the same thing about making adjustments for state members with disabilities. Candidates should be looking to do something. It's at the end of the day, it's not the triathlon, it's not a physical test.
It's not so much the door knocking, because I imagine some people don't actually like being interrupted while they're watching the telly or whatever of an evening. I think the
you
thing.
Pause at least.
Yeah, well you can, but I think it's the effort made to engage with people that the public appreciate. That the fact that a candidate has taken time out to come to talk to them in whatever way or shape or form, so that they can gauge their ideas and talk to them. So however you do that, if it's not the traditional door knocking but some other way of implementing that engagement with the public, that's the important bit, talking to the people.
So it's your favourite subject, Lisa. Change in constituencies, will it result in fewer members or the same as currently?
Right. Well, here's with my mathematical skills.
I know this.
We have the same number of states members, more or less. But
it is the same.
It is the same number. Terrible. Some parishes will gain additional membership to represent them. Some stay the same, and some actually, I don't think any have less. St Helier will gain an additional 3 members to represent all of the folk that live in St Helier. They've currently got 10 parish deputies. They're going to go up to having 13 plus their connotab to represent them. St Saviour stays the same. St Clement gains an extra two deputies. St Brelard gets 1 extra. St Mary, St Juan and St Peter gets 1 extra person to represent them. St John, St Lawrence and Trinity has the same number, and Grouville and St Martin, they actually get 1 extra person to represent them. So some are winners in this. Nobody's a loser. Effectively, what we've done is ensure that there's more balance across the island. So dependent on the population in a particular parish or district, that's now reflected more accurately in the number of parish deputies who are going to represent the people living there. The big difference, obviously, is that we won't have the island-wide mandate for the senators. But hopefully this system will mean that parochially, within your parish or your district, you'll have the same representation, and you'll have deputies who will be serving the interests of your particular district and be in tune with what the constituents of that district are wanting from them.
And we'll just have to see how it works out. But it will,
No, I mean, there is no perfect plan, and the fact that it's taken the States Assembly over 20 years to agree to this version, indicates how complex this whole thing has been in trying to rebalance the books. And let's see how we go. There will be eventually a Boundaries Commission brought in that will ultimately reshuffle the numbers at some point in the future. But for 2022, these are the numbers, and hopefully the system will prove fairer to those areas that have been perhaps underrepresented. for quite some time, given the large numbers of people who live in that parish.
Should we just deal quickly with one of the issues on which we've been raised with us, which is about advice or training for the next set of states members?
Yeah.
So we do put a lot of energy into induction for states members when they first get elected.
Yeah. No one expects you to just know how to be a states member from day one, and the States Gref, our department, provides a whole programme to support you through that journey from becoming, from once the hangover subsides from the celebrations, to being sworn in as a states member, so that you're ready to hit the ground running when the first meeting is convened. Behind the scenes, we do advice and guidance about how to ask questions in the assembly and how to put forward propositions and take things forward that you may have well promised the electorate that you would pursue, and also some of the subtler things like how to deal with the media, how to ask questions in the assembly effectively, and ultimately, you know, who to go to for advice when you need it. It'll be us, really, won't it?
Yeah, so how we've done it before is we do a week of stuff around being in the assembly. It's also an opportunity for the new members to meet each other and to meet other members.
Yeah.
There's then there's also a sort of ministerial induction, and we're going to be working with our colleagues on the government side to sort of dovetail those. And there's an important induction, which is for states members to find out about the various issues that are facing the states. So it's not just about the kind of procedures, that's very important, but also about the issues. We'll probably also do something with our Commonwealth colleagues, as they do a programme. We help out other jurisdictions and they can help us out. So there will be quite a lot, and it's an ongoing process really. So we have members who do there's like a university course in being a parliamentarian, which a number of our members have done, or we sponsor them on. So there's quite a lot, and as Lisa says, really, that's our job really, is to be there to help out. Well, we're getting some more questions, so we won't be quick because we're nearly finished. So, how will none of the above be considered after the election? So this is the new provision.
This is a new provision. Basically, I think none of the above came forward to ensure that all positions in the Assembly would be there would be competition for everything. Nobody would just get elected unopposed, as has happened in the past. So where there are fewer or the same amount of candidates as the slots available, then none of the above will be included on the ballot paper, which means that when you go to the polls, if you don't like any of the folk who are listed, you can still register a vote by saying that you're not happy with who's standing and you don't particularly like any of them. Now, the way it will work is that it's only if none of the above basically wins the election in that district that the other people will be discounted. But
the nominations reopened, aren't they?
Yes, and we start again until we hit that sort of magic moment where the public do actually like who's standing. So it's only if none of the above came second or third, for instance, it would be seen as a way of the people who voted for none of the above having expressed their view without necessarily having to have spoilt their vote, which is their only choice, or not coming out to vote at all, which is the only options really that they have now.
I think it should create more, I'll put this politely, I think it should create more work on the part of people who perhaps have not seen a contest. They will have to be concerned with the possibility that none of the above might win.
Yes, because that would be
So
incredibly embarrassing.
they need to get out there and demonstrate why they are worth a seat in the States. And that's a good thing for the democratic system. So again, we'll have to see how it works, but it's all got the same aim in mind of making the elections more competitive.
Yeah.
More competitive means that there is more of a fight for your votes, and therefore a healthier system overall than has possibly been the case. Well, than has been the case at times in the past. Because contested elections are really a hallmark of a strong democracy.
Absolutely.
We're coming into the last minute, and I don't mind sitting around for a bit longer, but we've got a great team in the Gref who've put this together, and you can't see them, but they're all to my left at the moment, and they've set all of this up, and they're sorting out all the questions, and they're all over social media doing stuff, and they really need to go home. So we're going to be finishing this off in a few seconds. But I would say, however, I will cause them more work by saying that if more questions are coming in, or they come in tonight or tomorrow, we will reply to them.
Yeah, happy to.
But obviously not like this.
Yeah.
So otherwise, thank you very much. And if you haven't, don't forget to register for the email updates on vote.je that we've mentioned before. They'll be full of useful information over the next few weeks and months. We've recorded today another absolutely
darlings today, aren't
YouTube video on manifestos, campaigns and hustings. And we're going to be doing this again on the 18th of November.
Is that next week?
Don't know.
Happy days.
I lost track of the time. So hopefully anyway, on the 18th of November we'll be back and we can answer more questions about election stuff. So we will see you again very soon. I'm going to look to my colleagues. Can I press the big red button?
Thank you.